Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have another fantastic guest. When did we ever not have a fantastic guest, right, Landon?
That's
Everybody's
all we
fantastic.
get. Yeah.
It's all we get. Everybody's fantastic. But today, I really mean it. We have Kate Flint with us. How are you, Kate?
I'm doing well. How are you?
We are good. I love your background. This is going to be fascinating to a lot of people. We were having some technical issues at the beginning. Kate said, let me run to your office. And here she, or run to her office. And here she is. So we are really excited about what we're going to be talking about today.
Nothing says Mormonish like a big colon.
Yeah. There might
be unique today.
Yeah.
Yeah, there might be some truth to that. All kinds of metaphors that we can make in comparison. So anyway, I'll tell you a little bit about, what we're going to go over today, and then we'll let Kate kind of introduce herself because she's an amazing, wonderful person. So sometimes in the Good Book Club, as you know, Landon and I founded a post-Mormon virtual reading group that is now in its 6th season. That was kind of hard to say, but we're pretty proud of that. It's pretty amazing reading a book a month for going on 6 years and having a virtual meeting about it every second Sunday at 11 o'clock. So anyway, sometimes the presentations are so good and the discussions are so good that I'm like, we got to bump this over to Mormonish. So there's a bigger audience that can learn from this. And so the book that we read that we're going to be kind of framing this around is called Being Mortal. And it's by Atul Gawande. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing his name right. I hope that was close, but the subtitle is Medicine and What Matters in the End. And it's a book about the end of life and the quality of the end of life. And of course, in our Good Book Club, we talk about everything through the lens of Mormonism. And there's a lot to talk about when it comes to end of life, next life, things like that. So I just thought this would blend itself really well to an episode. So enough from me. Let's have Kate just kind of introduce herself a little bit. And she's got some incredible slides and we will go through this topic. It's going to be really good.
Yeah, so my name is Kate. I'm originally from Colorado. I've lived in Utah for a few years, served a mission, did the whole Mormon thing, deconstructed about 2 years ago, and found Mormonish, found the Good Book Club, and have kind of just been following along with those for the last couple of years. So that's kind of my quick Mormon story.
Yeah, there it is. And Kate's amazing. She sends me all kinds of information, about temple stuff and all kinds of things. Yeah, so she's dialed in, let's say that. But in the Good Book Club, we volunteer. We put out our book list at the beginning of the year, 12 books, and then people volunteer for something that, sounds like something that's up their alley or they'd like to talk about. And Kate was the one that volunteered for Being Mortal. And so we are really excited to bring this discussion to you guys. So Landon, why don't we see if we can pull up the slides, or if Kate's the one that's running those.
Kate's gonna run them, so she'll pull them up.
Awesome.
And yeah, we had a great discussion on this. You think about end of life and how different it is in Mormonism versus outside of Mormonism, yes. And you've got to rethink things completely different. I think the first thing you think of end of life once you leave Mormonism is, now who's going to come to my funeral? Because, it used to be the ward was going to show up. And the second one is, where am I going to have my funeral? It's not going to be in the chapel now.
Who's going to bring the ham?
That's right. And will they have funeral potatoes?
Well, and the other thing, a lot of post-Mormons are like, how can I control, and we'll probably talk about this later, what kind of funeral I have? A lot of us have those concerns when you have children that are in, or a mixed scenario. You don't want your children, because at the end they're like, well, now mom knows the truth. Now she's going to want, to be buried in her temple clothes, all that. I mean, I've seen people go to the extremes of, putting it in writing, putting it in a will, getting it notarized. I don't know. It can be a little more complicated, but I think, as we'll talk about, for me at least, on the other side of Mormonism, end of life and next life is way more peaceful when I think about it. So, all right, let's get into this. Such a good book. Everybody go order it right now. It's seriously really, really good. Being Mortal. Here we go.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a fascinating book. And being an avid reader, I can appreciate that people have different tastes in books, but this is one that I do genuinely think everyone should read because it has such good information. So a little bit of background on the book. The author is Atul Gawande. That's how I've been saying his name, so hopefully that's right, Rebecca. So he's actually a general surgeon in Boston. He's a professor at Harvard Medical School. Both his parents were doctors as well, and he's a father of 3 kids. So he comes from a very strong medical background, which plays a lot into his experiences writing this book and the experiences he shares in this book. So this quote is one that I just loved that I think kind of summarizes the book. The battle of being mortal is the battle to maintain the integrity of one's life. So these are some of the main themes: is coming to terms with our own physical and sometimes mental decline, our own mortality, planning ahead for ourselves, and planning ahead for our family and friends, and lastly, finding some meaning in life.
Yeah, so, and I think that on the other side of Mormonism, like we just mentioned, almost every single one of those has to be revisited with your new mindset. It's amazing how you're kind of like starting over and rethinking everything in a whole new way.
Absolutely, yeah. Landon, did you have a comment?
I was just going to say, at first when I started reading the book, it was a little depressing because it was, about getting old and about, getting dementia or getting some of these other things. But even that, when you sit back and start thinking, how does that play into the gospel that we were taught, that your spirit is the same spirit, but yet here your body is forgetting everything, and you can actually become a completely different person than you were for part of your life. And are you judged on that? At what point does God stop judging you and all of that stuff? All those questions that would come up. But this one, it was a little depressing at first, but then he started bringing up some things about how you can improve that and how you can improve how you die in the end. And so that's where it became interesting. And he also gave some options for aging people and how you continue to live in the end, or what decisions you make.
Yeah, I think it matters what age you are when you read this book. I think we were kind of depressed by it, Landon, because we're like, oh, dang, we're kind of more on that other side of it, but I would recommend this to especially younger people, honestly, just to understand, to understand yourself, to understand your parents, maybe your grandparents. And I should say that the book is not technical. It's not like a medical, it's experience. He talks very much about his own experiences and people that he knows and frames everything with that. So it's a wonderful read in that way. But, some of the topics they're difficult. You may kind of push back against even thinking about things like that. But I think it's really important that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's natural to be uncomfortable with the topic of aging, with the topic of dying. It's something difficult that we don't want to face. But as the author talks about in the book, having these discussions now actually makes it way easier down the road. And kind of broaching the topics now makes decision-making a lot easier and makes coming to peace with things a lot easier than when we just push it off until it's staring us in the face. So I really liked this quote from the book. When the prevailing fantasy is that we can be ageless, the geriatrician's uncomfortable demand is that we accept that we are not. So aging is definitely something we are all facing at one point or another. And to tie this into Mormonism, I'd love to get Landon and Rebecca your thoughts on what does the church do well helping members as they age? Because I think it does do some things pretty well.
Oh, I think so too. I think about my own parents who, were in Washington State, same house since the mid 60s when I was born. And, both my sister and I moved far away. We would try to visit. They couldn't visit us very much because they were running a genealogical center, but they were in one of those wards, the kind of ward that the same people have been there for 50 years. And everybody cared for them. They were able to stay autonomous in their own home for, I would say, a decade longer than they probably would have otherwise. And we had people from the ward contacting us out of state and saying, we checked on your mom and dad today, or here's something that's going on. There definitely, I think, was a network to do that. And it's interesting. I think maybe now wards are more, fluctuating, boundaries are changing. It's more transient. And I don't know if that's in place. Also, younger people who do those, caretaking duties of other people in the ward, they're strapped and completely tapped out, with children and everybody working. So I remember going with my dad, he was the one that would always go, rake the leaves at the widow's house or mow the widow's lawn. He was very much a caretaker when he was a younger man of the older generation. And I saw that every day he was doing something or calling someone to check on. He was just a wonderful, caring person. And that was returned to him as an older person. I think he was lucky. I think my parents were lucky. I don't know if it's set up to be that way anymore. And especially if you step away from the church, I think that's something everybody worries about. Well, where's my built-in community? I don't have a ministering brother or sister I can call. Who's there for me? I know it's a concern.
Yeah, and I guess I would say what they do well. This is kind of a double-edged sword. Is often they give purpose to the lives for older people. They either do genealogy and my mother goes to the temple every 3 times a week or whatever it is and serves in the temple. Some people go on missions and they find that they feel like they're doing something important. I say it's a two-edged sword because likewise once you find out that it's not what it claims to be, then you realize that was all just a waste of time and that that they were wasting their time. But if they continue on faithful in the church and they think that it gives them purpose in their older age, and that can be important because some people otherwise would not have that.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think the community that the church offers is so important. I know ministering it's not super well done, but it's not completed a lot, but I think when it is done, it can work really well. And having that ward family, and then like Landon was saying, the sense of purpose that it brings. I know like my parents are looking forward to serving a mission. Mm-hmm. And I work with a lot of retirees, and I know a lot of them struggle when they first retire because they don't have a sort of sense of purpose. So having those activities in the church, whether it's a mission or genealogy or even just a regular calling, that kind of gives a sense of purpose to others in the ward.
Yeah, I think your second question there, what does the church not do well? I think that, Landon kind of touched on that, where you realize, oh, is this busy work? Are you spinning your wheels, even though they feel purpose? But just in the last week, I came across 2 different posts. Somebody was talking about their, an aged widow in their family who had been denied a temple recommend from a second counselor in the bishopric because she had not paid tithing on her Social Security. So there's this financial perhaps pressure that should not exist from a ward with these aging people. She later went to the bishop, and the bishop said, I got to research this, kind of held her on the hook for a while, and then said, okay, as long as you, paid on your gross, your historical contribution, it was ridiculous. Who needs to think about that when you're in your 80s? You paid, you don't need to pay, And then another one I saw today where somebody said that their family member had been told, if you guys will serve 1, maybe even 2 missions, your kids who have left the church will return. And this is from upper leadership, like area rep level and higher, So there is that ability, because these members have been in forever and they're kind of church broke. You kind of got them right where you want them, because they've been in for so long. There's the ability for what some of us might look at as abuse right there.
And I would add to that, that oftentimes they can steal your life in that I look at my mother. My dad died at age 65, so she's almost 85 now. So 20 years she's been without him, but she's never remarried. She's never dated or anything like that because she's sealed to my dad and she's waiting to go and see my dad. And so from that, though, to me, I'm like, you're missing out. You could have another relationship, another person in your life for 20 years, but because you believe that you're sealed to this person, you're going to see them again, you want to hold out and wait for that, when you could have had 20 years with someone, doing, having a positive relationship. And everyone gets to choose, and I guess that's what she chose. But I definitely saw that, she had no interest in dating or being with anyone else because she believes that she's going to go and be with him after.
Yeah, I think absolutely the pressure for women to not get remarried. And I actually saw the opposite side of this as well. My dad got remarried pretty quickly after my mom passed away. And part of it was a motivation to be able to serve in the church in a lot of capacities that you're not able to if you're not married.
Yep.
And Landon, you've seen the opposite side of that. So yeah, I think it really does. It makes you put your life on hold or make decisions you wouldn't otherwise make if you weren't putting the church at the center of everything.
And your experience adds to the fact that now you've entered into this. Now your dad is married to 2 women, and how's that going to be in the afterlife? And what's the family dynamic going to be? And it just gets weird. Whereas if you don't have that, it's just, hey, my dad got remarried and there's this wonderful woman in his life, and she doesn't become your eternal mother or part of your eternal family. She's someone on earth that you can appreciate for making your dad happy, So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think another thing, kind of going back to what Rebecca was saying, is that the church can steal a lot from members in terms of their time. So I know a lot of grandparents who don't spend a lot of time with their grandkids because they're so busy with church responsibilities, and then money as well. Not only paying tithing on a limited income, but unless you get called to be a mission president, you're paying your own way for missions, and that can drain retirement savings. I believe Utah is 50th among the United States for average retirement savings because of tithing and missions and things like that drain what would otherwise be a healthy retirement.
Right. And it's not just retirement. It's also being able to pay for end of life quality care, which is the one thing that about the book, they really talk about that. I think that's why I asked Landon, I had to read it like a chapter and then kind of put it down, because I'm like, oh my gosh, the things that you need to have in place, the finances that you need to have in place to have, a peaceful and calm sort of end of life scenario. A lot of that is taken if you're serving multiple senior missions and paying for that and paying, tithing. Like people will pay, tithing on money they put into an IRA, and then they'll tithe the IRA when they take the money out. There's just so many points where the church is double dipping into all of this, and all of it reduces, in my mind, the quality end of life. I remember going to my mom's and dad's assisted living, and I've told this story before, and she goes, "Oh, the branch president was just here, and look, he helped me fill out this stack of tithing slips for the whole year, and he'll be back to collect my check, on this day every month." And I'm just like, I mean, again, it's their money. They can do what they want with it. But really, somebody came over and helped a couple in their 80s fill out those slips to make sure that doesn't fall through the cracks at the very end of your life, when, hospice, medical bills mounting, things like that, they can devastate a family, an extended family even. So yeah, sorry, don't get me started.
Yeah, it definitely can be a heavy tax on finances at the end of life.
Yeah.
These are 4 questions that are recommended to kind of start the conversation around aging, especially with helping someone else in your family or a friend, close friend, plan ahead. So do you want to be resuscitated if your heart stops? Do you want aggressive treatments? Do you want antibiotics? And do you want to be tube fed or intravenous feeding if you can't eat on your own? Are there any questions that you guys would add that you think are important to discuss with someone when making those decisions?
Do you want a priesthood blessing?
There you go.
No, that's a reality. Again, on social media, I saw this scenario where a person had visited an LDS ward, and a man had, I believe it was a heart attack, but an incident where the man fell right at this person's feet, and they took him out and put him on the couch, and, they were trying to help him. The meeting just went on. You hear this over and over, but the paramedics came, and someone went out and said, "Wait a moment, we're doing a priesthood blessing. Wait." So that should be a question. Do you want medical intervention to wait while spiritual intervention takes place? I mean, seriously. You think it should be a given, right? That the paramedic should be let in. But this poster was like, I couldn't believe it. They put the paramedics off so that the blessing and all that could continue.
And a lot of times when you fill out the paperwork at a hospital or something like that, it asks what your religious affiliation is. So you got to be prepared, because if you're son or daughter's filling it out who's a TBM, they may very well put LDS, which then all of a sudden the bishop's going to come over and priesthood blessings are going to come and casseroles might show up, so maybe you want to leave it if you get
maybe that's not a bad part.
Yeah, but they could get you right back in it again all of a sudden just by someone filling that out that way. All of a sudden you're going to be caught up in the system.
It's interesting. In the church handbook, there is a section on kind of how to die, and it basically says, don't do things that are extreme. So I don't know if any of these would be considered extreme. I mean, it depends on your definition. Maybe they're talking about don't fly to China and try to get some kind of treatment. They talked about everyone learning lessons when you die, which I think could mean when you're struggling or in pain, you are learning a lesson through struggling or suffering, and maybe your family members are learning a lesson through suffering. So I don't know. It's interesting. What did you say today, Landon? Something about how, even to the very last second, how to die. There's something in the handbook about it, right?
Yep.
Yeah, there's always something in the handbook. The church has a lot of its bases covered there. So kind of with planning ahead and from a church lens, have you had this discussion with someone, or do you wish you'd had this discussion? I know for myself, I've kind of started the discussion a couple of times with my dad. It is very uncomfortable to start it. But it's also interesting coming at it from someone who has deconstructed, but also knowing that my dad, who's a TBM, there are things that are important to him. And like Rebecca said, there's some people in the opposite situation where you have kids who are TBMs and a parent who is deconstructed. So what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. As I kind of mentioned in book club, my mom and dad both passed away last year. And so I was there, and I have family members, of course, all around me, siblings and things that are still in the church. And, they had a different way of talking to them as they were dying. Can you see grandpa? Can you see, and of course I wasn't doing that. I was kind of having my own little experience, but respecting, what they were doing and saying and how they were dealing with it and how my parents wanted, to deal with it. But yeah, it goes both ways. And when I think about, I know what age you have to be to have this discussion, I'm like, I'm not old enough to say if I want to be resuscitated, but yeah, that's not real. But when I talk about when you have a mixed family, like your own children, like I have said to my one child that is not in the church, okay, I want this, and you need to, at first I said, you need to fight for this for me, but, like not having, the temple clothes or not having the, all that. But then I thought, that just puts the kids at odds, that just puts them at odds there at the end, where a couple of them are like, no, you don't understand. Mom wanted this. And the others are like, well, no, now mom knows she wants, there's just a lot of pain there. So, I mean, I think the answer is just be cremated, maybe. Landon and I have said that before. Let's just get cremated. But emotions are just so high, and things can go wrong at funerals and planning and with kids. Whatever we can do to put in place ahead of time, whatever we can write down or mention to someone or think through, like I had to think through. I can't set my one kid up to be like this for me and my post-Mormon status. That's not going to be good for anybody. So you almost have to have the discussion with yourself first. Right. And what do you want, and how is this going to play out, and think ahead. But yeah, big questions that are hard sometimes to face head on.
Yeah, my daughter asked me just recently about this, and she'd be the one who has to take care of all this, and she said, I need to know what you want if anything happens. And as I sit back and look at it, I say, she's not active in the church anymore, and she understands better what I would like, but still she grew up Mormon. Mormons only know one way to do a funeral. You show up at the church, everyone comes, they have a talk, then the bishop or stake president comes and gives the glove, talk about your spirit leaving and coming back, and sells the church. And then you go to the cemetery and they consecrate the grave, and then they bury you, and then they go back and eat lunch in the cultural hall and have funeral potatoes. That is how you do it. Well, that's not how I'm going to have but she doesn't know that. So what does she want me? And I don't know. I have to ask myself that. I was in Idaho working, and I'd go to this little bar. It was the only place in the town I was at for dinner. It was like a cowboy bar. It actually had bullet holes in the ceiling from people shooting their guns off. So, but as I said, some guy had died. One of the cowboys had gone to Montana or something. On the way back, they rolled the pickup truck, and he died. And they had taken his cowboy hat and they put it on a bar stool, and all of his buddies were sitting around, and they were having basically a service where they talked and drank and raised their beers to their buddy. And I was going, wow, that's way cooler than a Mormon funeral, So it got me thinking, what do I want to have happen when I die? And so, you can think outside the box now. You're not limited to, oh, I just got to go to the church and have this done a certain way, and I got to wear my temple. What am I going to wear? And I'm like, just cremate me. I don't need all this other stuff. I don't have this resurrected body idea that I'm going to come forth in the morning of the first resurrection anymore. I'm way down the list now. So I'm good with just, get ashes and spread them to the places that we like to go to. And then when you guys go there, you can always think, that piece of mud might be Dad, give them some ideas.
Oh, that makes me tear up. That piece of mud might. Well, when we did an episode on Mormon funerals, people don't realize it's a church meeting. It has a protocol they must follow. It is presided over, like you said, by an authority. And it even says in the handbook, the family wishes can be considered. It's not the family. It's a church meeting that is going to be run the way the church wants to run it. Now, of course, in a lot of cases, the bishop, very close to the family, it's going to be what you want. But overall, it's a meeting and it's a missionary tool. And that's the purpose. So if you don't want that, you need to start talking now to your friend. Maybe it's even friends and not family, but also put things in writing, I think.
Yeah. And like you guys have both mentioned, even if you, I've been to a few funerals, mostly LDS ones, but a few others as well. And they've always been in churches. But like Landon said, there's part of the neat thing about deconstructing is you can really think outside the box and say, what is the best way I want my life honored? And how can that look? Another thing I wanted to point out is like these 4 questions and other questions that you can ask. They're just a starting point for conversation. So you don't have to have the answers. You don't have to know exactly what you want, but they're a good starting point to get that discussion going with parents, with children, with their parents, whoever it is that you're having that discussion with.
Yeah. And I learned when my mom passed away that just saying do not resuscitate, there's a lot more to it than that, because she had a very clear do not resuscitate. She had signed medical things ahead of time. But when it came down to the very end, the doctor got right down beside her bed, right in her face, and said, we've discovered a life-ending diagnosis. This is life-ending. And my mom was very practical. She's like, okay. And the doctor was like, now you have a do not resuscitate. And she said, yes, I do. And he said, well, let's go through everything here. We're giving you pain meds to make you comfortable. Do you still want that? We have you on some oxygen to help you breathe. Do you still, you don't realize all the things they do, and then you can kind of decide, what do I want removed? And the bottom line in this scenario is I want to be comfortable, but, everything else, the medication that's keeping my blood pressure up, all those things, those can just kind of, fall away and slide into the great beyond. So, but I appreciated that doctor. And I think that probably is just the protocol. You can't just say, do not resuscitate. There's a lot of different interventions that are happening that a family member may not even be aware. So you really have to kind of be clear, what exactly it is that you want. But it's hard. It's a hard situation all the way around.
It is. There's always another decision to make in the medical world.
Exactly. Yeah.
So with aging, a large part of that can include becoming dependent. And as Rebecca, as you mentioned, getting care towards the end of your life. Landon, do you want to read that first quote on there?
Sure. Whatever the limits and travails we face, we want to retain the autonomy, the freedom to be the authors of our lives. All we ask is to be allowed to remain the writers of our own story. Boy, that sounds very Mormonish. I'm the one who writes my own story.
Whenever you can sing a My Turn on Earth song, you will do it. I've learned that about you, Landon.
Absolutely, yeah. And Rebecca, can you read the second one?
Yeah, it says, this is what it means to have autonomy. You may not control life's circumstances, but getting to be the author of your life means getting to control what you do with them.
So I think we've all either experienced or seen parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, whoever it may be, kind of as they reach the end of their life and they start becoming either physically disabled or cognitively losing some of their abilities. And so this is one thing that stood out to me in the book is the focus on maintaining our ability to make our own decisions. What thoughts do you guys have on kind of these quotes?
Well, I think certainly, you want to be able to, that to me is the worst part. I saw my grandmother, she had Parkinson's and she just lost the ability. I think she could still reason and understand what was happening, but she couldn't respond, which you could just tell it was so frustrating to her because she couldn't communicate back what her needs were. And it got so bad that she eventually, just stopped. They were feeding her through a nose tube, and she pulled that out and wouldn't let them feed her anymore till she passed on. Because, there comes a point where when you don't feel useful anymore, you don't want to be alive. And so it's important that we want to be able to take care of ourselves. When we become dependent, it becomes very difficult, and it's hard to step back and let someone else do something for you that you've always done on your own.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I have this story about my grandfather. I feel like the last things kind of left in your brain are maybe what you've, kind of focused your entire life on, because when he was getting to the end, what he would say when we'd come to visit and then we'd say, bye-bye, Grandpa, he'd say, and this is from years of presiding at church, don't forget to put away the chairs and tables. And, he was like, thought he was at the end of a meeting, and I just thought that's his whole life. He's been presiding at church and he's been telling people to put away the chairs and the tables. And that is what is left there, in his mind. So I don't know if that's sad or cute, but, it's just interesting. I think, your whole life just kind of condenses down at the end is what I've seen, with relatives and my own parents. And, whatever we can do to help people still be able to feel like they have some control, and then when there's a point where you don't be there, if that's something that's fearful, because it would be, I've seen it, that it is when you recognize that that's happening. So, and every scenario is different, but it's interesting because, when you throw Mormonism into the mix, it's all just part of it. You came to earth to have a body. You knew that pain and suffering would be part of it. You're able to put it in this framework, that it has a purpose, even things that are happening to you at the end of life that could be seen as, just devastating, if you didn't have that framework. So, and I think I see that when you step away from the church, people say, oh, how will you deal with things like that? You don't have the perspective. Well, the way I deal with that is just going, life is random. Some people don't get Alzheimer's. Some people do. Some people end up like this. Some people don't. It's random. And to me, I find a lot of comfort in randomness. That's fair. Luck of the draw. Other people don't. But I find less comfort in the idea that it's part of some massive plan or lesson for me. I don't know. But that's just me personally. So.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things, again, where the church can be a double-edged sword. It's, obviously we teach free agency. And I think that part of the good side of that can be, part of the bad side can be that a lot of times we're taught to be so independent that we don't know how to let others take care of us. I've seen that in a lot of people that are kind of hyper independent. And I think the church tends to foster that a little bit. I think the good side of the church's teachings is that they also teach humility. And so a lot of people I see as they age, they take those teachings of humility and become and allow others to take care of them. So again, I think it can be kind of a double-edged sword depending on what principles, what teachings get a little bit more ingrained from the church into our psyche.
Yeah, I think you're right. And then when I think about control, the ultimate control may be deciding when it's time to opt out. Do you know what I mean? And that is certainly not acceptable in any kind of LDS circles, because the idea, like I said in the handbook, is that to the last second of suffering, you're learning something and your family members are learning something. That's the concept. I don't have that perspective. I opt more on the side of, I would like to have control. I hope by the time I'm at that point, maybe there are options because, I can see the benefit of that, having control to the very end, to the point where you decide when it's time. So I don't know. Not everybody feels that way, but I've been leaning more and more into that idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a choice that everyone has different feelings on. Mm-hmm. This kind of continues that discussion. So we want autonomy for ourselves and safety for those we love. And that's something I've definitely noticed is even from a parent to child perspective, you see the toddler or the teenager who wants to do things their way and the parent who's concerned about their safety. So we worry about the safety. And a lot of times when we're deciding on what kind of care our parents get, our grandparents, whoever it is, we care more about safety, or they might care more about autonomy. And so a lot of times it's trying to find a balance between those. And that includes, like I said, Carson said of her tenants, they still get to make poor choices for themselves if they choose. And that's something that you don't realize how much you value the ability to make poor choices until that's taken away from you.
That's why STDs are rampant in nursing homes.
They are, actually. That is the highest growing percentage of demographic that have STDs are. And I read such an interesting article. Now we're on a tangent, but it's because the people that are that age in assisted living were children of the 60s, right? They were hippies, and you live longer with better health longer. So you're pretty strong and vibrant, even in your 70s, going into your 80s. And so, yeah, I remember touring when my sister and I were searching for assisted living homes for my parents. They were still in my hometown, being cared for by the ward, but we knew we had to move them closer. And so we were touring around and we visited one, and I almost feel like the person that was giving us the tour was a cruise director, because she's like, "Oh, here's this, and it's just like high school." She said, "It's just like high school. The people are out there meeting each other. Those two just got married." She pointed to a little man in a jazzy scooter who was pulling along the wheelchair of a woman, newlyweds, and she waves over at them. And then she goes, "Those two over there, they want to get married, but their kids won't let them." I'm like, I bet damn well their kids won't let them. I mean, that's all you need is to put mom into a assisted living, and all of a sudden, half of her money is gone. But yeah, it was interesting because it was just like, wow, in this particular, assisted living, everybody was living it up, if you can say that. But again, that's choices, that's autonomy, that's good choices, bad choices. And if that's what's happening, that's great. We did not pick that home. My parents are genealogists. They're a little more conservative, and they were married. They didn't need to date. So, but there are all kinds of options.
Absolutely. I'm kind of curious what choices, especially being outside of Mormonism, that you find most important to make as you age. How has that changed since leaving Mormonism?
Yeah, that is interesting. And I think that all the time I was in the church, and I was serving and helping people that were older, you have that framework. I always just thought, well, I'll have a safety net. That's what I felt. I would have a safety net. I feel like just society as a whole and the church as a whole has kind of moved past being that so cohesive safety net that it used to be, although people try. I mentioned that before, but I feel, as I stepped away, I am out on a limb. I am without my safety net. I noticed that in little small steps as I, still living in my cul-de-sac with all my LDS neighbors, and, oh, I need to borrow an egg, but gosh, I'm not as close to them as could I really just call them out of the blue? There were things like that just a simple thing that went by the wayside like that. they would have loaned me an egg in a second, but I didn't have their phone number anymore, or I didn't, I had moved on to other things. And so that safety net kind of erodes. And then when you think of really needing help, like you are disabled with an age related something, you start realizing you need to make your own plan. You need to put your own safety net in place, whether that's being extremely financially prepared or, whatever that means, you really do have to put it in place. And then anything else that happens to be there for you is just kind of gravy on top of that. But you are in charge of you, I think, is what I've learned, for better or for worse.
Yeah, for me, the choices that are important is that when I retire, I want to be able to do what is important to me and what I enjoy. I don't need to be pressured that, oh, you need to go serve in the temple 3 days a week. You need to go on a mission. Here's what you need to do with your retirement, with your extra time. I want to do what I want to do. These are the last years you have. I feel like you got one life. I don't feel like there's an afterlife. So I want to make it count. In the last few years that I got, I want to make them count and not be told what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a time of life where you want to prioritize what's important to you, which I think everyone kind of feels it to some extent. But what is important to you has just changed since leaving Mormonism. And I think, Rebecca, you kind of answered that second question. What do you wish our society's care of older adults looked like? And part of that is we have to sort of build a new community, which is difficult to do outside of Mormonism for sure, especially if you're still living kind of in the heart of Mormonism. But building some infrastructure, some community for ourselves, it definitely takes some work.
Yeah, it does. Go ahead, Landon.
One of the members of our book club, they have a group. He's in California. It's called The Village. And it's been really impressive because several members of the village are part of our book club now. And it's a lot like kind of like home teaching, where you join this group and then they take care of each other. And they have someone who's in charge of technology who helps you when you can't get your computer working. You can call that member and they come and help you with technology. And they when someone gets shut in, they bring them food and they check on them, and everyone, takes care of each other. And sounds like a really, really good idea to me. It's really quite a positive thing when you see that they watch out for each other and have figured out how to take care of each other. And this is, older people taking care of older people.
Yeah, and it's everywhere. They have, I want to say, franchises of the village, because you do pay a membership. There's like a staff that kind of handles some things administratively, but it's mostly the people volunteer, just like in a ward, their skills, and they watch out for each other and help each other. So he does talk about that a lot on our book club, and the rest of us are like, yeah, that sounds like exactly what we used to have. But you made me think of something, Landon, when you said, if you really do believe this is your life, then you do react and act differently as far as the choices that you make, because serving multiple missions, going to the temple every day, doing your genealogy, that's sort of laying the groundwork for the next life, right? You're doing you're kicking the can down the road. You're going to see the benefits of all of those on the other side. If you no longer believe in the other side, then you have got to do things that are meaningful and important and long lasting as far as relationships with friends and family, here and now while you're here. So it's a very different mindset. My parents were so looking toward the other side. I feel like they lived there more than here with us. You know what I mean? Everything they did was for, the other side. All the names they found, genealogically, those were going to greet my parents, when they passed away, and they were laying up, they were laying the groundwork for this wonderful life on the other side, and we don't have that. I don't have that belief anymore. So it really is about things that happen now, and what can you make happen with what time you have left.
Absolutely. Yeah. That kind of ties right into finding meaning. As outside of Mormonism, it's a discussion in a lot of post-Mormon spaces, is finding meaning, but especially kind of as finding meaning with end of life decisions, with aging. Landon, do you want to read that first quote?
Yeah. Human beings have a need for both privacy and community, for flexible daily rhythms and patterns, and for the possibility of forming caring relationships with those around them.
So this kind of reminded me of what you were talking about earlier. I don't remember which family member it was, but they lost the ability to communicate. And I think that's one of the hardest to see, is when you lose the ability to communicate, you lose that ability to connect with others. And so we kind of have that craving, that need to connect with others, which, like we were talking about, sometimes those connections are all gone when you leave a church and you have to figure out how to build some new ones. Rebecca, do you want to read those next two quotes?
Yeah, it says, I want to be helpful and play a role, she said. Yeah, and that's so important, right? To feel that you're still needed, that you're still useful, that you're still wanted. That's incredibly important for a satisfying life. And the next quote is, the trouble was that she expected more from life than safety. Yeah. And there is that balance. Like I said, I've just come out of this. My sister more than me cared for my parents, and she cared for them in an apartment down the street at first from her, and then into assisted living. And then at that point, everyone had come to Utah with me. So we all kind of pitched in. But, safety, I think, was everybody's priority, like you would sacrifice autonomy or being helpful to keep them safe. But that doesn't necessarily lend itself to total quality of life. So it's that very delicate dance between safe, but, let's make sure you have some meaning and you still get to do some of the things that you like to do. Like my mom liked to go to Hobby Lobby, right? So we would make sure that, that's a craft store for those of you that don't know, but we'd make sure that we took her there because she loved just to browse around, right? And why not? And I started thinking, what things do I just do on a daily basis that I can just go and do without any problem? That at some point I'd be like, I really miss driving through the Swig drive-through and ordering a drink. I love that. So yeah, if you're a caretaker, those things are extremely important. But I like that first quote about daily rhythms and patterns. And we talked about this in the book club. On the other side of Mormonism, a lot of your daily rhythms and patterns when it comes to ritual and celebration and meaningful things, those are gone because they were so tied to the church. And we talked about how we read a book called For Small Creatures Such as I by Sasha Sagan, Carl Sagan's daughter, where there are ways that are not tied to religion that you can create patterns, meaning, time, marking time as it's passing. All those things are really important as you get older, so important. I mean, my mom, she was the birthday card sender, right? If you had a birthday, she'd gone to Hallmark at the beginning of the year and she'd purchased a card for every, that's important to people to mark things. And we have to kind of find new ways. And I know you had talked about that before, Landon. You're really trying to think of, with grandkids and stuff, you have them, I don't. What do we do now? Beginning of life, end of life. How do we mark this? What are our rituals and patterns?
Yeah, traditions are such an important part. Rituals and traditions are so important to us, and finding new ones, especially as life feels, as you get older, life feels like it's going faster because, a year is a much smaller part of your life than it was when you were in elementary school. So a year can seem like it flies by. And so having things that mark that passage of time, especially when you're not able to do as many things, I think it's really important that we talked about with one thing that the church can do well is provide purpose and meaning. And I think that's something that we want to be helpful. We want to have something that we can contribute to in our communities in some way. And for some people, that could be being grandparents and just being around their grandkids, seeing their grandkids, helping out with their grandkids. For other people, it might even be going back for a small part-time job just to have something to do. It could be volunteering in the community, helping out someone who needs help more than you do. But I found that something that is really important is having something that drives us, that we can contribute in some way to our community. So one thing that I wanted to ask is, how can you find meaning when you're physically or mentally unable to do everything you used to do?
That's a good question. What do you think, Landon?
I'm already at that point where I can't physically or mentally do what I used to be able to do. You definitely have to lower the bar of what the expectation is. You start realizing, I'm not going to go out and run a marathon at this point. I'm not going to remember all the grandkids' birthdays because I'm horrible at remembering anything. you kind of have to just set the bar a little lower and take life a little slower, because that's what you have to do, and you just have to start accepting it. But you can find alternatives, different ways of doing the same things you enjoyed. I used to go boating all the time, the lake, and go boating. Well, that's a lot of work to put a boat and get it out and get it gas and everything. And, I've got to blow up one of those swimming pools in the backyard. It's about 4 feet deep. I can go out there and lay out there and be in the water, and it's almost as relaxing as boating without all the effort and everything. So you can find alternate ways to do things that you used to do that make life a little easier.
Yeah, and I don't even think we have to use the word maybe lowering the bar, but that's not necessarily used in a bad way. Like, I have an example, probably about 7 years ago. I wasn't working at the time. I was running 5 to 8 miles a day. I was going to the gym. I was lifting. I was into it. It was fun, right? My kids were all in school. I was having a great time, and I overdid it. I worked too hard and I lifted too hard, and I had a horrible back injury, an extruded disc, like the worst they have ever seen. And I was in a lot of pain, tons of pain, sciatic. It was just awful. But the worst pain I was in is that I couldn't go and do everything I was used to doing every single day. I could not do it. It was so frustrating. I was in mental pain because of that. And even when the pain in my back got better and I didn't end up having surgery, I was able to kind of just like do a lot of exercises and physical therapy on my own and kind of heal it. But I still wasn't back to what I could do. And I was so mad and I was so frustrated. And I finally talked to a physical therapist friend of mine, who sees people all the time whose abilities have become limited, some to a great degree. And she goes, you have to lower the bar. That's what she said. I'm like, I don't want to lower the bar. I run 5 to 8 miles. I was not accepting that would probably not be, I would have to really work back up to that. She goes, go in your closet, take a pillow and just scream into it. Scream all your frustrations, scream how angry you are that your lifestyle is changing. You can no longer, do all of this, and then get over it and then figure out what you can do, work back up to it. And honestly, that helped. I was just at a place where I could not let go of what had been. Once I did that and then, started working my way back up to the things that I could do, then it was okay. So it's acceptance, I think.
Absolutely. And I think my next question there, how can we learn from the disabled community, is that's a huge part of it, is kind of grieving, allowing ourselves to grieve what we wish we could do. And then going from grieving onto acceptance and accepting what we can do and finding meaning in those things. I know some people find meaning in really small things, such as just going out and getting the mail from their mailbox. Yep. It could be as simple as that, but it has meaning to them because it gives them something to look forward to. It gives them a purpose to look forward to.
Yep, I think that's very real. I think about, there was this program where inmates were given chickens, right? A chicken. I mean, what is that going to do? Oh my gosh. Not only did the chickens flourish, but the inmates, it was incredible for their well-being. They had someone to care for. They had, something to be responsible for. It was small. It was just a chicken, but it made all the difference in the world to a certain community. So get yourself a chicken, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that Dr. Gawande talks about in his book too. There was one of the nursing homes where they brought in animals, and a lot of people that were previously barely doing anything suddenly had a purpose to care for these animals, and they invested themselves quite a bit in these animals because they had a purpose. And so it could be animals, it could be plants, it could be anything small that gives us some meaning.
Yeah, I would say if it's an animal, like if it's an elderly person living on their own and somebody gets them an animal, make sure you have a plan for the animal when the person passes away, because that can be a very sad situation too, when there's no plan for that animal. So consider that when you're making those plans and talking to people, what is going to happen to the animals.
And you might want to check with them before you get a kitten or a puppy, because those take a lot of work.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They have a lot of energy.
An old senior dog. That's what we need.
Yes. Exactly.
You have one of those, Landon. Maybe you could start taking Addie around to care centers or something.
Yeah, I could leave her there at this point.
Oh,
She's getting aged as well. It's very difficult. She used to be able to go out and go to the bathroom by herself through the doggy door, and now she can't. And it's so I'm watching all this mortality happen through my dog at this point. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, the last topic I wanted to cover is facing mortality itself. Rebecca, do you want to read that first quote?
Yeah, facing mortality. A hospice nurse enters people's lives at a strange moment when they have understood that they have a fatal illness, but not necessarily that they are dying.
And
Do you
then
want
the
me to read
second.
the next?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, death is the enemy, but the enemy has superior forces. Eventually, it wins. And I'm glad we're going to talk about this because, again, having gone through this in the last year, hospice it's a whole different world. If you have not experienced it, you have no idea. And you just have to know that they're literally angels on earth. You hear that? But they really are. And one of the things that they gave my family when my dad, it was probably 6 months, prognosis where he would be leaving us. They gave us a booklet that kind of showed what death might look like, 6 months out, 5 months out, things you might stop doing, losing interest, physical things that might be happening. It's just very general. I read it. I'm like, I feel like that too. Losing interest, tired, can't sleep. Am I dying? But, as I got down to the very end, there were some very specific things that it mentioned that I'm so glad it did, because we all knew, that's not alarming. That's just ending, So you just have to face it head on. And of course, it's very different when it's an elderly person, it's very different. And if you see them in pain, a part of you really wants that to be over so that they can be okay. So there's all that. When we're talking about a younger person, you're going to fight like hell. There's a big difference between a cancer diagnosis when you're 21 and a diagnosis when you're 89. Huge difference. I understand that. But for anybody that has had interaction with hospice, you know what I'm talking about. This is a whole different world, and thank God for them. They're absolutely incredible. So
absolutely. Hospice nurses do some incredible work. How has your view of life after death changed since leaving Mormonism? And how has it changed your view of mortality? Go ahead, Landon.
That one's easy for me because I don't believe in an afterlife anymore. And so I know that this is all I get. So I live every day knowing that, this is all I have. Is this how I want to live my life? And every day you can kind of put the question and say, maybe this isn't the best way for me to live, or I want to change something, and you change it. It's not, I just got to suffer through to the end. And when I get to the end, then life will get better. No, this is what I get. This is whatever I make of it. So I've got to make it now. It's all I get.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Today is the first day of the rest of your life, right, Landon? Every day.
That's right.
Well, and I've talked about this before, but I was very terrified of Mormon death. It sounded just really chaotic and scary to me. I thought, okay, so you die. People see a movie of your life. You're judged by a panel, God, Joseph Smith. Oh my gosh, would your bishop be there? And my plan was always, to look at God and say, really, Joseph Smith, come on, you're giving this guy a pass, But then the idea that if your spouse had died before you, you'll see him again, but is he with a whole bunch of other women? Will you be with any of your family members? Will you be sorted like a sorting hat down to another kingdom? It was just full of confusing unknowns, and
I remember all the signs and tokens.
I was just going to say that. No, there was just a horrible post I read a year or so ago that just has stayed with me, where there was a post-Mormon at the bedside with faithful Mormon family and an older person dying. And the person was confused and panicking that she did not remember the signs or the words to say. And she was crying and she was asking, tell me the words and show me the signs. And the faithful family members wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it because you can't do it outside of the temple. And the post-Mormon who was watching all this was just like, are you kidding me? So the last moments were complete agitation and fear, that she could not remember what she needed to get into the presence of God. That's absolutely absolutely ridiculous, And so I do think fears come out at the end. I had another family member in-law, that passed away, and she was so upset about the devil getting hold of the children for hours. She was ranting about Satan and evil and the devil, you're just like, oh my gosh. And then I think just the concern that it's over. Did I do enough? Am I worthy? Am I going to be judged? Did I do everything? Do you want to sing that song from My Turn on Earth, Landon? Is it over? Have I, the very final song? That's exactly it. Again, at the very end, you're concerned that you didn't do enough or you are going to fall short. That's all gone on the other side of Mormonism. I don't worry about that kind of judgment. I think I might reflect on, my life and my relationships and what did I do, but I don't believe there's going to be someone judging me or I'm going to be sorted into a kingdom. I'm just going to slip away into, whatever's next, whatever it is, but it's not what I was scared of as a Mormon. So I am not a fearful agnostic. I feel actually more peace than I have before. So interesting.
Yeah, I relate to both of those. I think there's a peace in not feeling that there's some sort of judgment out there. Mm-hmm. And like Landon said, there's a peace that comes from living in the moment and focusing more on this life instead of spending so much time living for the next life and not worrying about spending your last days trying to figure out your salvation with fear and trembling. That you can just live out peacefully and know that it is the end, but it's a peaceful, something that's peaceful. I won't pull up this video, but it shows a discussion that borrows from Buddhist philosophy, where we're kind of like a wave in the ocean, and we crash up against the shore, but then we return to the water and to the ocean, and the water is still there. We're still there, but we're just existing in a different state. And I always liked that philosophy. Like Landon said, spread my ashes to where it's meaningful to my family. That you're still there. You're just more of a memory than actually physically there, and it can still be a peaceful thing.
Yeah, no, I love that. And again, I had to kind of put my money where my mouth was on these philosophies last year when both my parents passed away within a few months of each other. And I thought, okay, I think I know what I believe, but until you're, faced with like the death of someone very close, like a parent, you don't know for sure, and I remember I was always very disturbed that when someone would die in the church, people would instantly start inventing a fantasy life for them. Oh, he's on a mission. Oh, he's doing that. Oh, he's meeting with grandma. Oh, it was like almost didn't even miss a beat. Like they would pass away and suddenly they have this whole fantasy existence for them in the next life. And I always thought, even as a faithful sort of person, I always thought that, how do you know that? What about the person who's here? And that's exactly the feeling I had when both my parents passed away. I was very in the moment with them, who they were in this life. I did not create any fantasy in my head. Like other family members were like, can't you see grandpa? Do you see, I wasn't doing any of that. And then I felt so connected to them and their memory and all of that. I mean, really connected, like they're really, people always say, oh, you're here. But I really feel like they are here because I don't have this illusion that they're somewhere else. They're back in the ocean, like you said. And I'm the link, I'm the memory. Here I am, having spent my whole life with them. And so that's really meaningful. So to me, that's way more beautiful than saying, oh, he's on the floor with a heart attack. Oh, no, he's doing missionary work right now.
You can't even die without a lie.
You can't even die without a lie. There you go, Landon. You need to make bumper stickers. But, and again, that's just me. I know people in our listening and viewing audience may feel differently, but I just felt incredibly at peace when my parents died. And even now, I just took some flowers up to their grave. They're about an hour from here, buried with, in a family graveyard with all my ancestors, my, grandparents, my Mountain Meadows Massacre ancestor, all those. And I'm just like, I feel really peaceful that they're there and they're okay, and they're with me and my memories. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And something you said just reminded me is that we're talking mostly about people who are passing away from old age.
Yes, we are. There's a difference.
Yeah. There's definitely a difference, especially with when someone who dies younger gets a terminal illness. It's God forbid someone's child dies. That's a whole different type of grief that we're not really touching on here because it hits in a very different way.
Yeah.
It does. But again, to me, there's peace in randomness. When you do have something so tragic like that, some people say, what did I do wrong? What brought this on us? That's the worst case scenario. What does God want us to learn? What purpose is here? And of course there are lessons and things that happen, but I find comfort in randomness. It just happened, and we'll deal with it. It just happened. And very early on, when I was kind of formulating this philosophy, when my kids were very little and, I was still in the church, my son, I've told this story before, my oldest at the time was 8, and he was very ill and rushed to Primary Children's Hospital. It was very touch and go. We were all there. And I remember thinking, okay, again, money where my mouth is. How do I really feel? Do I think there's an afterlife? Do I think there's God? This is the worst case scenario. I'm at Primary Children's Hospital, and everybody around me, family, they're all praying. And I was going, no, I don't really think there's anybody that I feel like is there that's going to influence this that I would pray to. But I will send really positive vibes to all the doctors and the nurses and the technicians and everybody here, and I did that. It ended up with a positive outcome, but it was another moment where I'm like, okay, if I believe there's a God, this is the moment where I'm going to believe it, because my child is, having a huge struggle. So I don't know, the idea that you don't have to second guess what's happening, and you don't have to think, why is God doing this to me? Randomness. I'm telling you, for me, that is peaceful. Maybe not for others, but for me, it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of goes along with that, is how can we, I think, approach or teach about death from a non-religious viewpoint? And I think you guys have both kind of touched on that. But like you were saying, Rebecca, that there is kind of a randomness to life. Like you were saying, there's a peace knowing that it's randomness and not someone making decisions, like God choosing that to happen. Like I mentioned before, my mom passed away and I was young. I have a younger sibling as well. We were both teenagers at the time, and we heard the excuses of she's doing things on the other side of the veil. She was needed more there. Yep. And that hits especially hard when you're still a child, wanting your parent there. And even worse when it's, someone even younger, when it's kind of, there's a comfort knowing that it is just random. It's not someone trying to put you in pain for you to learn and grow.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a tough one. And of course you do as a human being find meaning, when something happens, but you don't need to think that somebody is punishing you or you've done something, or, you don't have to think that, but then you can focus on the meaning, the good that can come out of something eventually. So I had a very close friend that passed away, complications after having her 5th child. And it was the first time I'd really experienced young death, someone that was young. We were just in our early 30s, new moms. We just moved next door to each other to raise our kids together. We were best friends from college. And suddenly she's gone. I mean, with 5 kids and a baby, and it was the roughest funeral I've ever been to. And it was just horrific. The hymns that were played there, the song that we sang as college roommates, I still can't even hear those notes on the piano at church today without going into I cannot hear it. It's just so devastating. But afterwards, I heard the bishop talking to a group of people, and he said, well, I feel like, there were some non-members here today from the neighborhood, and maybe that's why she passed away. Maybe that's why. And I just remember being so angry, even though I was faithful. Are you freaking kidding me? A mother of 5, all under the age of 9. And it's so that some random neighbor might hear the gospel. But again, you have to try to find meaning, right? Because you are devastated. So I'm no longer mad at that bishop. But at the time, I was furious just because of that. So,
yeah. Any thoughts, Landon, on our teaching or our discussing our approach to death?
Like I said, when I've seen wakes and different things that aren't religious in nature, they're just straight out loving in nature. We're doing this because we love this person. And that should be how a funeral or how a death should be approached is, man, we love this person, we miss this person. shouldn't be about, well, where are they today? Did they do the right things? Did they check the right boxes to get where they are? Or is God there receiving them? Or are we going to say, oh, they didn't do this that they were supposed to do? Just think, if they'd have done that, they'd been in heaven today. But instead, it should be about love. Death is about the ones we love, and that we're going to miss them. And that's really what it should come down to, in my opinion.
Well, and often funerals, LDS funerals, aren't even about the person. I know they don't mean to do that, but they're more about the teaching moment, or there might be an investigator here or somebody that can learn the gospel. And it's not even about the person, especially if the death was, something like I went to a funeral where someone had ended their own life, and it was a teenager. It was another incredibly tragic funeral. And, the stake president got up and he said the name of the boy, said he is not okay now. He is not in a good place. He needs to, and he was trying to stop anyone else, in the area. I lived in the area where there was a rash of these scenarios happening at a particular high school. It was in Utah County. Some of you may know what I'm talking about, back in 2017. But, here's the stake president saying, he's not okay, your friend. He's not right now. He's going to have to work through something. People walked out. It was a very negative experience, even though I understand he was maybe trying to save the life of someone else. But yeah, the whole idea that it's rarely about the person. There might be a little life sketch, but it's certainly not your hat on a chair in a bar, right, Landon, and raising a glass. So again, have those conversations. What kind of a memorial would you like to have? What would you like to do?
Absolutely. So any final thoughts on how this book has changed your perspective, or anything else from the book that really stood out to you guys?
Yeah, and we've really only been able to touch on, just some of it. I really can't recommend this more. Honestly, it's difficult as far as it makes you think about things. Like I said, I'd read a chapter and I'd go, okay, I'm putting that down. Oh, have to think about that. But then when you get to the end of it, you're like, okay, you know what? I can make choices now. I can make decisions. I can have conversations that will greatly change my trajectory and my outcome as I'm older. And especially if you're younger and you're reading it, it can really change the way that you look at things, even care of, elderly people in your life right now, or yourself. So I just think it made you think about all the things you kind of knew maybe you should think about, but didn't know how to think about them. Do you know what I mean? And this gives you a framework, like I said, personal experiences from the author, just kind of showing you what he's talking about. It's not a clinical book at all. It's just a book that makes you think. And then, of course, everything we read is through the lens of Mormonism. So we put all that on top of it. It was a book that I think we'll all be thinking about for a long time. So highly recommend.
Yeah, I looked at it as, what do I really want, and what do I value in the end, and how do I share that experience? I think growing up in the church, I always went and the whole ward would show up when somebody died, and when my dad moved out of the neighborhood that we lived in all of our lives, one of the neighbors asked him, well, you're going to move to a different ward? Who's going to attend your funeral? And, as I think back on that, I'm going, you know what? I'd rather there be 5 people there who really love me and really care about me than a bunch of people that I went to church with are there saying, oh, he did this or he did that, or he was a missionary, he was a faithful man to the end. I want him to love me not for what the institution I belong to, the contribution I made to that, but to the contribution I made to those people that love me most.
That is such a good point. It reminds me, boy, we're talking about so many sad topics, but it does remind me of a youth that was kind of in my circles who was, I think, an accidental overdose. And there was a funeral in the LDS, stake center, and nothing that was said was about this kid at all. They remembered him as a Boy Scout, right? 10 years earlier, kind of a thing, just things that he'd done in the church. And I was sitting toward the back, and there was a group of his friends. You could tell, they were not part of the ward, and they were in the back. And I overheard one of them goes, "You want to get out of here?" And the other one goes, "Yeah, let's go smoke a bowl for Connor." Let's go smoke. I mean, I guess that was their tribute, that's what they were going to do, because this funeral was not it was not talking about the kid. It wasn't telling anything about, who he was. Again, it's a supercharged time, and the parents, grieving and all of that. It's, you can't make light of it, but it's definitely something to think about and talk about ahead of time, and let people know what you might want to have happen, and, see if you can make that a reality. Of course, the bottom line is you won't be there, right? So maybe that's okay, right?
And if smoking a bowl is what you want your friends to do,
I know.
That, there's
yeah.
in that.
I'm not condoning smoking a bowl. I'm just saying they wanted to do something, that they had all done together. So I don't know. It's a rough topic, but the more we look at it and talk about it and get comfortable with it, the more it can be something positive, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, don't let the church hijack your death like they hijacked your life.
Landon, you are full of t-shirts and bumper stickers today. Are we writing
that
these
was good.
down? We need to add these to the merch store. So
yeah, that was a good way to sum it up, Landon. I think it's, like you guys have said, it's an uncomfortable topic. It's a difficult topic. I first read this book a few years ago, and so I've had some time to process it, and it does take a while to process it. So it's, if you just read it in the last month or two and you're still processing it, that's very understandable. It does take a lot of time to think about it, to think about what's important to you, especially coming out of Mormonism, where everything is kind of prescribed and the answers are given to us. Is now coming out of that, we have to re-understand what our perspective is on life, to kind of build a new perspective, and almost our own personal philosophy around aging, around death, and what that means to us. But Rebecca's right. It's a very approachable book. The author shares personal stories from their life and stories of people they've worked with in a very approachable way. So I definitely recommend it. Highly recommend it. It's a very, very good book.
Yeah, it is. I did have one more thought as far as conversations. Oh, look, final thoughts. There it is. I have a final thought. Or as Landon would say, do you ever have a final thought? There's no end to your thoughts, right? So I was thinking about, just saying have conversations. We also have to put ourselves in the shoes, if we have stepped away from Mormonism, of our family members. Some of them are very scared for us because of their belief system. They believe, that it's not going to be, it's not going to be good, or, I don't know if they know what's going to happen to us, but especially if we were to say, I don't want to be buried in my temple clothes, I don't want this or that, that can be coming from a place of love from them, but they may push back and be pretty tough about it just because they're very afraid of that decision that we've made. So we have to understand that they are worried for us, and what's going to happen in the next life, coming from a place of love. So you have to look at that if you get pushback or anything like that, because they don't know, and they're worried that you're not doing the steps that they know you have to do to successfully pass on to the next life, and be happy. So, they're afraid for us, I think. So be careful in your conversations. That's my final thought. But any final thoughts from you, Landon? Any more bumper stickers or t-shirts?
I've given my final thoughts. Yep.
You're good. Well, we're so glad, Kate, that you, as soon as we were having the book club discussion, I was like, we got to bring this to a wider audience, because, it's just one of those things, huge life decisions and choices. When you step away from Mormonism, you just have this blank slate or this giant whiteboard in front of you that you're like, okay, what do I draw now? What do I do? Where do I go? And the other thing I think I would say is that with all these choices, if you're dealing with elder care, things like that now, there are resources. Just keep asking, start with your doctor, your parents' doctor, there are resources. I learned that, the unknown is what's most terrifying about this. If you're caring for someone or even planning for yourself, and even though it's not my nature, I'm more like, I just don't want to think about it. If you think about it, go head on, get the answers. You're eventually going to arrive at a place where you're more peaceful about it. So, you're probably not like me where you don't like to put your head in the sand. But if you are, just go get information. There's a lot of people willing to help who have been through a lot of these things before. So I think it's good. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And thanks to our audience. Please comment and let us know what your thoughts are. How has your perspective changed on the other side of Mormonism, if that's where you are when you think about, life after death, if you believe in that? And it's so interesting, don't you think, even on the other side of Mormonism, some people firmly believe there is another existence. Some people firmly believe there isn't. It's almost like anything goes at this point, and nothing is right or wrong. So let us know what you all think in the comments. Please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware of when the new episodes come out, you can hit the notification bell. We have links in our show notes to donor box if you would ever like to make a donation to help support Mormonish Podcast so we can continue bringing on fantastic guests like Kate to read fantastic books like Being Mortal. We really appreciate all of you that do. We just can't thank all of you enough. We have links in the show notes to our merch store. Maybe we'll put some of Landon's slogans on a t-shirt or a bumper sticker, right? He seems to be coming up with them right or left. But either way, thank you, Kate, so much. It's been wonderful. And thank you again, Landon, for co-hosting. And we will see everybody next time on Mormonish Podcast. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.